Welcome, everyone. Welcome to ReEnvision Life Talks. It's great to have you here. Again, I am excited to have today's guest. Her name is Chanel Dokun. And let me tell you a little bit about her before we bring her on. Chanel is a certified life planner and relationship expert trained in marriage and family therapy. She specializes in helping women step into their life's true calling through her Women of Consequence life planning organization. Prior to running her own practice and co-founding a seven-figure therapy practice, Healthy Minds NYC, she worked in publishing at Hearst magazines. She now splits her time between New York City and Atlanta with her psychiatrist husband and son. Chanel's writing and contributions have appeared in publications such as New York Times, Real Simple, Women's Day, Essence, Moneyish, Christianity Today, and Relevant Magazine. So please welcome Chanel Dokun to the show.
Hey.
Hey, so good to see you.
You
I'm not gonna
too.
lie. I'm like, all this tech stuff gets me a little anxious.
Oh, I know,
Uh,
I know, but that's okay. There's space for anxiety, so we're okay with it. I love this though. This is a beautiful platform, and hello to everybody that be a part of the conversation today.
Yes, absolutely. So again, so much of Envision Life Talks is about hearing people's stories and really being able to get a sense of strength through other people's stories, as well as that courage and hope to make the kind of life change that one might want, especially when they feel stuck. And so, Chanel, I would love to start off with actually having you talk a bit about your life and bringing us back to just how you grew up. What were some of the experiences of life that shaped you to be where you are today?
Yeah, well, I could go on for hours, so I'll try to be careful of our time. But I grew up out in California, so I live between New York and Atlanta now. But um, I grew up in Southern California in a family that I always say that we were like the poor Black family in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I share that because I feel like a lot of my childhood was wrestling with what it means to sit at the intersection of different cultures, different socioeconomic status, and just people from different faith backgrounds and a lot of diversity. Whereas and within that, I often felt like I was the only one, right? I felt very alone and very different. And so I think if I were to characterize a lot of my story, it was trying to find my place in the larger culture and to be able to assess, who am I? What am I about? What do I value? And what are the ideas that the larger culture around me seems to value? And it's funny because, of course now, and we'll talk about this later, I guess, but, a lot of my book is about that very idea. And even until you asked me that question, I didn't realize kind of how long I have been wrestling with that. Um, but a lot of it was me feeling like I needed to compare myself to others, trying to understand uh, what limitations were on my life based on kind of being in a world that didn't really honor my ethnicity and didn't affirm that by any means. And one of the things I'm most grateful for is that really created within me a need to be able to affirm my own identity without validation from anyone else. Like there was no
Yeah,
larger group that was going to say like, "Hey, you're cool because you look this way or you talk this way or whatever it is."
yeah,
I had to learn what it meant to kind of find that worth from an internal
yeah,
space. So
yeah.
that was a lot of my growing up.
I can so identify with that as an Asian growing up, actually, when I was younger in a predominantly Caucasian, like a little town there growing
Yeah.
up, and then actually moving to a more diverse place. But even then, even though it was more diverse, there was still, I guess not as many people who looked like me,
Right.
until later on. And so now we live in the most diverse place in the world that I think in New York City.
Right.
And what my girls are growing up with is so different now. They are able to see people of just diversity and more culture, and they're learning so much about themselves through that. But I definitely resonate with what you're saying. Is
Yeah.
there in that experience something that stands out to you, that was, yeah, standing out in any kind of way about that?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that I'll say. I remember having a girl that was in my um kind of friend circle, I guess I'll say loosely, when I was younger, and her just really saying that she couldn't understand me, or that she couldn't relate to me, and I wasn't really welcomed in that group, and so getting booted from that circle of friends. um, I'd experienced a little bit of hardship. Of I grew up with a mom who had been sick for a lot of her life, and I ended up kind of serving as her caregiver for a lot of my kind of adolescence and teenage years. And so a lot of my growing up was dealing with really heavy adult things. Now, as a therapist, I'd kind of be able to use that language of being more of a parentified child. At the time, I didn't have language for that, but I knew that I needed to kind of operate in this more adult way. And so um, that was probably one of the biggest things that shaped me, was recognizing that I carried with me a burden to deal with, like, weighty parts of life that my friends seemed to have a lot of freedom and ease. And um, I think one of the things that I wrestled with was, how come internally I feel like I'm struggling and things are so hard? And yet it feels like everyone around me is having a good time, like they're having fun, they're experiencing this freedom. And I felt like this weight and this emptiness. And also, I think felt a little bit of rejection from that. And what does it mean to hide your hardship? Because, there's a fear that if I'm open and honest with people about what's really going on in my life, and the difficulties I'm facing, um, either they can't relate, because I assumed that their lives were perfect, right? From the outside looking in, I
Mm-hmm.
thought everything was great for them.
Yeah.
So either they wouldn't relate to me, or, they wouldn't welcome me, and I would continue to be pushed out of the group. I remember one girl saying, "We just want to have fun. Like, your life is hard. We want to have fun."
Oh.
And so I think that's a message that I carried with me for a long time, of what does it mean to be yourself, to be authentic, um, to be open about your wounds and your difficulties, without fear that other people won't carry it with you or hold you in that space. Um, so that's probably one of the biggest things that I remember. And the other thing that I'll say, just as another story, maybe that kind of strongly comes to mind when I think about my childhood, and informs a lot of what I do now, is this moment that I had with my mom. And my mom was the oldest of about 11 kids. She had been
Wow.
raised by a single mother, and her mother was,
Oh my goodness. God
right,
bless her. Oh my
right.
gosh. Wow.
Yeah. And her mom was a single mother. And so she grew up with her grandmother and her mom, and then, kind of was thrust into this role of mom at a very young age, caring for her siblings. And then she had three kids of her own. So, and all of us kids were about 10 years apart. So we're very spread out. And I always think,
Uh,
man, she spent about 40 years of her life raising kids who were, under the age of 10. Like, we were just like always children coming in.
yeah.
And I have this memory of walking into a bookstore with my mom, and she used to take me there as a treat for doing well in school or whatever it was. I got to buy a new book. And I remember this one day of being with her. I was about 7 or 8 years old. And she paused around the magazine stacks, I think, and just said, "Hey, Chanel, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I remember, immediately kind of answering, "I want to be a writer, or a TV reporter." It was like one of those things. I'm excited about it. And I think I was just so inspired by all the books there. I loved literature, and my mom loved reading. It was like the thing she honored more than anything. And she was so happy, and she just beamed at me and was like, "Oh, that's so great. It's so great that you know who you want to be." And immediately her eyes kind of started to glaze over, and she kind of started to stare off into space. And I had that moment where you know somebody's not with you anymore. And so I pulled on the hem of her dress and I was like, "Mom, where'd you go?" And she said, "That's so great that you know who you want to be." And
Mm,
she said, "I never knew who I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. No one ever asked me." And
wow.
I just remember like the sadness and the heaviness that seemed to hang on her face. And she said, "I thought that I would get my turn. Like I thought eventually I would get a chance to figure it out for myself, but I just kind of had to keep raising kids." And that message, her story, I think has left such a strong impression on my life because I thought my mom was really amazing, but I did watch her struggle through my whole childhood, and she had a lot of hardships. Like I mentioned, she had a lot of health challenges, and I saw how she had delayed wanting to live a beautiful story and do something meaningful with her life. How she'd waited thinking that that would come around eventually, and it never did. I mean, she passed away 10 years ago, and I thought, I never want to feel that way. I personally never want to be someone who doesn't step into what I'm meant to be or doesn't engage that question earlier on, doesn't feel like that's entitled, part of what I'm
Yeah.
entitled to.
Yeah.
And I, want the same for the people that are in my life. It's like I want to be a woman who asks that question, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Who are you? Why do you
Yeah.
exist? So anyway, those are some of the things that I think have largely shaped how I approach life and some of the wounding that I've carried with me um, from both of those instances.
Wow. Your story just now about your mom, and hearing that and then hearing that she passed away, I was just instantly moved because
Mm.
the on the cover of your new book, which by the way, everyone, it just launched this week. And it is,
Yeah.
I was reading this out loud to our family as we were driving down from New York to Tennessee, and it was just wonderful. Our girls will, and we'll definitely talk more about the book going, throughout our time. But I just got tears in my eyes now, Chanel, because, on the front, you dedicated it to your mom, to your mother.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it says, to my mother, Johnny,
Hmm.
who always helped me keep my head above water.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, what a beautiful dedication.
Yeah.
Knowing a little bit about this, about her, and how you just kept her that time in mind, and how it's really full circle moment as you launch this.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. I got to when the book came out just this past week, I got to go to a Barnes and Noble with my son, who's 7 years old, and we got to go ask for
Uh,
mommy's book, and it was just like this moment of being thrust right back into I'm there with my mom, and I felt like we did it. It felt like her name was there,
wow.
like you made it, mom. You're here too, and you get to have this moment right alongside me. But
Goosebumps
yeah.
as you're saying that just now. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, no. I mean, it's wonderful. And,
Wow.
I think we all have those people in our life who just shape us. And my mom was definitely, aside from, being my mom and all the great things that comes with, she definitely was just my best friend and cheerleader. And I think the one who so many of the truths that are embedded in the book have really come from my mother, of her reminding me, like, you are a whole person. I don't care what anyone else says about you. Like, you are valued, you are worthy, you are loved. And her speaking those things over me all the time. And she used to always say, just like, take it easy, like, like I'm an Enneagram one, super intense, like the world is broken and I have to fix it. And she'd be like, relax, it's okay. Um, so I think my mom was just such a joy for me, and I'm so grateful for her life.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm sure she is in heaven celebrating
Yeah.
with all the angels and, just like, oh my gosh, that's my girl there.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so.
Absolutely. Oh, it's beautiful. So, was there something? Now, you grew up in California.
Mhm.
What brought you over to New York? That's like
Yeah.
the coasts.
I know. Well, I kind of I wanted a big life in the sense of I grew up with this love of literature. So I had this like reverence is the only word I could use to describe it for publishing. And I wanted to work in the magazine publishing industry specifically. So I moved right after college from LA to New York City and kind of bounced around, did the whole, two suitcases and sleeping on someone's sofa and all of that we do as New Yorkers. And I was able to actually land my job, the dream job that I wanted in publishing. I got to work at Hearst Magazines, which at the time it was such a, I mean, Hearst is still great. So, but at the time there was a lot of exciting energy of what was going on there. O Magazine was there, which I just like was like, Oprah, oh my goodness. Like I would pass by, Gail King on the escalator or whatever. And it was like amazing. Um, so I really loved that. And yeah, that was, a huge pivotal moment in my life, I think, is getting to actually like land the dream job. Get to where I worked at House Beautiful. Um, and unfortunately, I worked there at a time when everything started crashing down.
Oh
um,
gosh.
we were there at the time that I was there like 2008, I want to say. So it was right when we were experiencing, the big financial crashes were happening, and no one could get a job, and also magazines like were really struggling, both from what was happening in the general economy, and people were blogging, and everything was going online and everything was digital, and so the idea of a print magazine was like, why?
Yeah.
um so magazines were folding day after
Mm.
day. But I felt like I was on the little engine that could, because when I was there, House Beautiful had been around for about 100, and I think we were 112 years at that point.
Wow.
And so they had this long history of being this underdog that no one really paid attention to. They were just like, yeah, it's a good magazine. It keeps putting things out and we like it. But it wasn't making any headlines. Um, and then in the time that I worked there, they launched something called the Kitchen of the Year, where we would build a life-size kitchen in the center, like in Rockefeller Center. And it propelled us into this new stage where, while everyone else was folding, we were attracting new readers and growing, and our
Wow.
budgets were growing, and it was really exciting. Um, and that was my aha of going, I'm here. I'm like in Rock Center. I'm doing all the things. I'm living my dream life. And it's totally unfulfilling. Like, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so that kind of propelled me to want to seek out a more meaningful life. But yeah, but that's how I kind of ended up in New York, was just
Wow.
chasing after a dream, chasing after who I thought I wanted to be.
It's really interesting how the thing that we dream up sometimes, and we go after it. And again, it's not that it's bad, but those moments where we are in it and we experience it, it's like, wait a minute, is this really what I want? Is this actually the
Right.
thing in the life that I want to live? And, it's, that, and this is where I actually want to segue a little bit more into your book, because I think so much of what you start off talking about is this notion of significance. Yeah.
Yeah.
And really how kind of riding this treadmill, this hamster wheel of what we do on the outside as, let's get me that dream job or that dream house or, that partner in life that'll give me everything, then I will be fulfilled. And that will give me a sense of significance or accomplishment. And
Right.
yet, there is something that you mentioned in regards to consequence. And you actually, what you have now actually is an organization called Women of Consequence.
Right.
And and I was telling Chanel, my husband and I, as we were in the car and I'm reading this part, we kind of had this conversation about significance and consequence. And it was just interesting because emotionally, I think we were coming from a place of, wait, but who we are as people, couldn't that be like, if we know who we are, that we know that we are significant, especially as a person of faith? It's like, okay, I derive my sense of worth and being. And I think you eventually get to that,
Right.
in your book. But he was going back and forth. Wait, well, I think emotionally it felt a little like for him, like, wait, isn't that where what we do come from that place? So what's the difference? So if you can talk a little bit more about that, especially for those who will catch this live or are seeing this now or catch this on replay, what's
Yeah.
that difference between that significance and consequence?
Yeah. So I think that um, one thing that you said that I think was really helpful too is that the idea that, we spend a lot of time pursuing significance and pursuing success. I kind of equate those two of significance and success. Um, I think we can waste a lot of our lives pursuing something that we don't want, which is certainly what my experience was. We get caught on that hamster wheel where it feels like we're just living out a narrative that's been set before us. And we haven't really thought about how much does this actually align with who I want to be. But I do find a difference between significance and consequence. So I think that significance, the clearest way I can describe it is a life of significance is one that is externally formed. It's one where someone has imparted value on you, right? It's one where you're deriving your identity from what other people say about you or think about you or values that have been set before you. And I find that it puts us in a place where we're constantly trying to measure up, or we have this external reference point for the way my life, quote unquote, should be. And a life of consequence is a life that's very different. It's recognizing that I don't have to pursue significance because it's something that I already have. You're right, especially as people of faith, we recognize I have inherent value. That's not something that I need to strive after. And it's certainly not something that comes or goes based on my performance or what I'm able to acquire or anything else in my life. I have significance just because I woke up this morning.
Right. Yeah.
So, a life of consequence starts to ask, what does it look like for me to be internally driven? And what does it look like for me to have a clear sense of what my identity is and to operate in an authentic way, like, and to stay in that space every day where I naturally impact the world around me? That's why I like the language of consequence. Like, as a result of me showing up and being here, there is a consequence to the world around me, right? And so I give shape to the water. I leave ripples, in the water based on simply my being. I don't have to try to become anything. So it's really about kind of where you're finding your identity and what you're using to create meaning and direct the steps of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. You did, and you unpack so beautifully, actually, all of that in your book. There was your starting off point, which I thought was just articulated so well, was just what impacts our sense of significance from the outside. And that has a lot to do with um what we are. Oh gosh, there was a word that you had used, and I remembered it while you were talking about it, and it just escaped my mind.
Yeah.
But that connected to this sense of, like, what are the liturgies, right?
Mhm.
And habits that, like, really it talks about, like, what's capturing our attention.
Right.
Yeah. And so I wonder if you can also talk about that as well, because I think that seems to inform also that sense of being a person living from a place of just, I am deriving externally my sense of significance from all of these things versus, yes, my knowing who I am, and that almost that sense of mindfulness of my actions, what my attention is drawn to will have, from there will be the consequences, in a sense that I live out my life and live into who I am. Right. And
Right.
so I love the liturgies notions. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I love the language of liturgies too. I think it's really fun to think about some of our daily habits and routines as liturgies because, I think the language of habits, you're like, oh, yeah, that's stuff I do. But the idea of a liturgy being an activity that I'm engaging in that's forming and shaping and influencing who I am, and not just who I am, but what I long for, right? And so, as you were talking about, this idea of where do we derive our kind of meaning and our definitions of success? I write about in the book this idea of dissociation, really. It's this idea that we're regularly dissociating from our lives. And really, that's just kind of a, $20 counseling word of us kind of saying,
Yeah.
I am regularly kind of checking out of my own story, right? I'm
Yeah.
not so
Yeah.
much in my own skin. I'm not present to the life
It's
that
like
I'm
this
living.
escape.
Yes, an
Yeah.
escape. That's great. And so I feel like we have a habit, and this is kind of one of the lines in the book that I use, is that we have a habit of not inhabiting our own lives. When we think
Mhm.
about the daily things that we do, we are taken out of our own story all the time. We scroll social media and we get pulled into, we're not what's happening before me, but what's happening there online, or we're watching Netflix. And so I'm pulled into those stories. And I don't mean to rail against those things. They're fine.
Right.
And thank you
Yeah.
for all of you who are watching on social media right now. We love that you're a part of our story. But that's fine when it's a temporary thing, right? When we're consciously engaging that and we're deciding for a moment, I'm going to escape to this other place that I've counted as being valuable and important to me. But what happens when that becomes more of just how I live my life, where I'm regularly disconnected from where I'm sitting presently, when I'm not thinking about how I'm wired, what I need, what I value, what I care about, what I'd like to pursue. And so when all those things are being shaped more by, what's happening on my feed, or the emails I'm getting from
Yes.
work, or the
Right.
text messages from my family and friends, that can cause us to experience kind of a more permanent state of dissociation. And I think that is one of the biggest barriers that keeps us from living a life of consequence or a more purposeful life, because we're not living our own life. We're living someone else's life most of the time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a poor
Absolutely.
version of it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Now, how does that impact one's overall emotional being, you think, and
Yeah.
even just mental health, psychological health, spiritual health, living
Yeah.
somebody else's life?
Yeah, I think it causes us, I think that's a lot of what I see, at least, there's a lot of anxiety and depression that I see happening with my clients, because I think that we're sending a subtle message to ourselves all the time that my life is not where the action is. Like, that's not important, or it's somehow lesser than. And I've elevated something else to be more valuable than where I am. Um, I love that moment. When you go out to dinner with someone and you're all sitting around the table, and then somebody picks up their phone and they kind of just look and they glance at something. And the message is very clear that whatever's happening here on my phone is actually more important than whatever you're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
I'd rather be elsewhere. Um, and I think we're aware of that in a group setting and when other people do it, but we do that to ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
We
Mm.
kind of go, hey, I'm sitting at my desk at work. Maybe I'm working on a project. Let me just pop on and see what's happening with People magazine right now. Right. Let me just like check out Instagram really quick and just go there. And I think there's a compound effect over time that really does do mental and emotional and spiritual harm to us, where we tell ourselves that what you're doing, what you care about, what you're pursuing in this moment is not really what life is about, that real life is happening over there. And
Yeah.
so that creates like this perpetual state of disconnection that I think um, we have to overcome if we want to start to um, have a stronger sense of who we are, and like have a stronger sense of my life matters, that I'm doing something, I'm living a meaningful
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, with that, you talk about a practice,
Oh
that
yeah.
leads to just kind of an maybe an unstuckness about that. Because I guess the question I was thinking is, how do you help someone that feels stuck in that?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful to have that as like the diagnosis, right? If the issue is that we're disconnected from ourselves, then the solution or the treatment has got to be that we focus on how do I re-embody my own life. And for me, I mean, there's so many different things that you can do. You mentioned, I love that, the language of mindfulness, and we need more mindfulness in our life. So, whatever kind of practice can create that for you. For me, I recommend for my clients that we do this reclaim the morning practice. And essentially it's just having a daily time where your voice is the first voice that you hear, where you are able to tap back in and hear your voice louder than everything else. And so before I wake up to my day and I allow the external world to tell me who I am and what I value and what my purpose is, I spend time actually paying attention to my own needs. I remind
Hmm. Hmm.
myself for myself who I am, right? And then I move out into the world with that greater sense of direction. And I kind of become, or at least I've taken time to identify my North Star before something else kind of in a way tricks me into believing that it is my North Star.
Yeah.
So that kind of daily habit of checking in with yourself and being present can be really transformational.
Now, is there something, because that sounds great, because I'm also thinking, okay, here's someone who's like, okay, yes, uh,
Yeah.
that's great, but it's not my thing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I hear you. One, I am not a morning person. So I will say that I am not a believer in like the 5 a.m. club or that you have to have like these intense miracle mornings or whatever. Like, no, thank you, hard pass. I do not like to wake up that early.
Yes, me neither.
Yes, yes, I'm a night owl. I get my best inspiration and creativity at about 10 p.m. right after I should have already been in bed. So, um,
That's me. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So if you're someone like that, I will say I still do maintain the reclaim the morning practice because I feel like it is very different than me tapping into my voice at any other point in my day. If I do that kind of like over lunch or I do it in the evening, in some sense, the damage has already been done by I've been swept up into other people's stories. And so I find that it's slightly skewed.
Mhm.
You can, we have like a reclaim the morning course where we actually walk people through it so they can develop it as a habit because I know that it can be something that's really counterintuitive to do. So we have some prompts and journal things that can help you to actually adopt it. If you're someone who like does not do this,
Awesome. Hmm.
that can be helpful. But I would say if you can't really wake up and sit quietly and do journaling, I would start to audit and pay attention to what are those first voices that
That's good.
kind of
Yeah.
come into my world at the
Mm.
start of my day.
Mm.
So is it that, I wake up to my family rushing in with their demands, or, if you're someone who has children, they're immediately like asking you for what they need. And so you're swept up
Yeah.
into the role of parent.
Mm.
Or is it, you have a partner that's maybe asking you to do things? Or is it that I roll over and I'm checking the news? And so I
Mm.
instantly, my Apple News alert is going off and telling me all the terrible things that are happening around the
Yeah.
world and all the celebrity gossip right alongside it. So I would take that time to actually audit that and then to start to edit out the things that aren't in alignment with who you want to be so that you can at least have some control over that and be a little bit more intentional rather than being in a more reactive state.
Yeah. I love that, auditing yourself,
Yeah.
and like just seeing it, like just taking that moment to really just take stock of what's happening and what is my morning like. And I think that does require, let me just pause for a moment and really like be still. You know,
Right.
I love how in your reclaiming the morning, there's this one part where like if you're not a journaling person or you don't even know what to write, just write like I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write.
Yes.
I will tell you, I have absolutely like assigned that to some of my clients and
Yes.
actually said, just write that, just start somewhere, just do that. And I've actually done it for myself. This is the
Yeah.
day, maybe not in the morning, but at some point, certainly where it's like, I have no idea, but I know this is a good practice. So I'm just literally writing whatever comes to mind, whatever my thought is, right? Like, this is a good practice. I'm sitting here. I have no idea what to write, but here I am, you know?
Right. I'm here. I'm here. I'll receive it. And what's funny is I think we all surprise ourselves, right? Like
Yes.
something comes out over time. And I think it's to, so much of the job of as, a therapist or counselor, or, coach is to spend time getting curious about your clients. And
Yeah.
I think that clients or individuals, we can do that for ourselves. And I love that
Yes.
about the Reclaim the Morning practice is it gives you an opportunity to be curious about who you are and to go like, huh, okay, I didn't know what to write. And after about 10 minutes, what I suddenly started journaling about was like, my girlfriend and this new, I don't know, this new guy she's seeing, right? And you're like, why did that come to mind? Why was that one of the first things? Let me like follow that little rabbit trail and see what's being triggered in me by that.
Yeah.
Why does that interest me? And so that level of curiosity, and then you get to see the consistency over
Yeah.
time where you're like, oh, wait, I didn't just talk about that one day. That actually came up 3 times in a week. Why do I care about Sandy and her new boyfriend? Like, no one cares. I didn't, So I think it is helpful to give yourself the time and just be patient to see what emerges as you're going through this practice.
Yeah. Now, what if somebody wants to come to you or someone like you who is a life planner, and there's life coaches out there? Like, can you talk a little bit about what the difference is between the two?
Yeah. So I love this. And I love talking about this with you because I can be a little bit biased in that I so value and elevate the world of therapy. And so I think that therapy is like the gold standard. If you can have someone to sit with and impact your life that way, it is such a valuable experience. I'm trained as a therapist. I don't practice as a therapist all the time now. So I've moved into this world of life planning, but all of my therapy training, I can't put it behind me. So it sits with
Yeah.
me in the room every day. The main difference I see with life coaching and life planning is that a life coach really starts at the space of it's very present and future focused. So, where are you now? And what are the big goals that you have? And how do we move you into that space? And so sometimes people who are actually kind of looking for more of therapy can end up working with a coach because they think a coach is going to help them break through some of those barriers or obstacles and they can reach their goals. And certainly with a good coach, some of that can happen. Um, Life planning actually takes a very different approach. And so the way I often describe it is like if you woke up on the side of the road one day and you had amnesia and you had no idea who you were or how you got to that point, and someone came along and they said, hey, I can help you get home. If you said, well, I have amnesia, I actually don't know where home is. So thank you so much that you'll give me directions for how to get where I want to go. I actually don't know where I want to go.
Mhm.
So all of their aid and assistance is pretty useless to you if they can't get you to that starting point of knowing who you are. And so I feel like that's what a life planner really does is we start at the place of saying, well, who are you? Like, what are you actually about? How are you talented and gifted and wired? And what's your life story? And what are where do you have life equity, which is something I love to talk about of like, what is your
Yeah.
life about?
Yeah. Mm.
And then how do we actually determine where your destination is? So rather than helping you reach a goal, there's no point in me helping you get what you think is your dream job if you're going to get there and ultimately be
Mm.
dissatisfied.
Mhm.
So we start with helping you identify goals and then making a practical strategic plan to reach them. So I feel like it's a little bit of a broader process than sometimes life coaching can be. It's like a little bit of a hybrid of therapy and life coaching in that way.
Yeah, that's the sense that I got about the whole life plan because you go deep. I
Yeah,
remember you talking about one of your clients who came to see you, and it's basically the client who's well giving you an excuse for everything.
right.
They're saying like, "I think I need community," and you unpack, okay, well, what's going on? Who are your connections? Who's your community? And you come to understand, oh, she actually has community. She has
Right.
people that she's connecting with on a daily basis. These are good people. She's talking about a couple of other things there, and it's like every turn is like this roadblock.
Right.
And you did something that just dawned on you that helped her to actually get into therapy. But can you talk a little bit more about that particular person? Because I think there are
Yeah.
many folks that are out there like that.
Yeah, I she was one of my favorite clients and it is a very common experience. And I think that she's the type of person that would probably want to seek out working with a life coach, but I think that experience would have been unhelpful. So just like you said, she came into the process going like I want to live a more purposeful life. There are things that I want to change. I'm unhappy with the life that I'm living now. And I was like, great, you're primed for this process with me. And then as we would dig into it, one of the largest complaints that she made was around community and feeling very disconnected from other people. And we did an audit of her life and where her time was going. And she was like, oh, I actually feel drained. I have a lot of great friends and I'm a part of this Bible study. And I have this group of like girlfriends that I connect with on a text thread all the time. And I thought, okay, if I had just taken your word for it and I had just said, well, let's just help you build community and let's make a plan for that without more deeply assessing what was going on in her life and the story that she's been living, I think we would have just gotten her to a place of burnout, where we
Mm,
would have constructed a
mm,
life with more energy and activity, and it could have looked more dynamic or great on paper. But I think she still would have felt the emptiness. And
yeah.
what turned out to be happening with her is that she had come from a real trauma background. And um, she was someone, speaking of dissociation, who had spent a lot of her time checking out of her life story, that she
Mm,
had spent a lot of time kind of daydreaming, and she would kind of indulge these fantasies all the time. So she was kind of always telling herself the story about other
mm,
things that were happening. So for her, what I realized is, oh, when you say that you don't have community, a lot of times that's just because you daydream a lot and you're not present with the people that you're with. Um, or you have this fantasy self of the way that you think you should be or how you should live your life. And so when you say you lack community, it's not because you literally don't have meaningful relationships. It's because you don't have certain people that reinforce this fantasy self that you're looking to create. And so some of that took us like looking at her background, auditing more of like the real people in her life, and then delicately trying to get her into therapy to
yeah.
address some of the trauma.
Yeah, I thought that was such a powerful example,
Yeah,
of like some of the things that we might have some um, blind spots to, but also how those oh gosh, what did I wrote it down, like dissociative
yeah,
liturgies that we have in our lives really impact us in the way that we want to live. But not only that, just how our past has informed our present. And if we
right.
haven't really understood that, there are some people who come in and they're like, oh, you're going to tell me about how my parents impacted me, right? Like I got mom
Right.
issues or dad issues. And it's like, well, I mean, I know we hear it, but we kind of have to we have to go there, uh,
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
has shaped us. It has made an impact on our lives, and our growing up years have really hardwired some things into us.
Yes. And I love that of even with you of this like idea of re-envisioning life, right? Is like it starts with us also understanding like what is the story that I've been living? And if
Yeah,
I want to start to construct something new, if I want to step into, a new awareness of myself or shift things, I have to kind of have some sort of awareness of, well, what was happening in the past, right?
yeah,
So I think it is a critical part of of the process, even though yes, I know everyone rolls their eyes like, oh great, you're gonna make me talk about my mother. And then I will say they all say at the end, I'm so glad you made me talk about my mother. I didn't realize
yes, right,
how much I'd taken from those formative years. So
yes,
it's helpful to revisit
absolutely.
your own life story.
Yeah. So let's say somebody comes, and especially, and I want to ask about women because you work specifically with them.
Yeah.
Like, I guess why women? What brought you to work specifically with them?
Yeah. So I mean, I love women. I think that I feel drawn to working with women in therapy. I worked with a lot of men in individual therapy, and then, of course, a lot of couples with marriage and family therapy. So that's kind of my sweet spot. I still do a
Yeah.
lot of premarital counseling. But I love women in particular because I think that we have unique challenges when it comes to stepping into our purpose. I think not that so much that men are radically clear on who they are, but I
Mm,
think some of the roadblocks and the cultural limitations that are on
mm,
men can be very different. And I also think we're in this fascinating time that I see with women where um we were kind of kept for so many years in this like domestic space where women weren't allowed to pursue their vocation in terms of the professional world. So the idea
Hmm.
was you were to find your life and your meaning at home, getting married, having kids. And that was that was it. That was like the idea of thriving.
Yeah.
And we've now evolved where, thank goodness, women are able to be affirmed for the work that they do outside of the home, that you don't have to get married. That's not the only option for you.
Yeah.
But I think culturally, we've done this interesting pendulum swing where we are starting to find our identity in work much the same way that men previously found their identity there. And so there's a great article in the Atlantic where they talk about work being a means of identity production,
Mm,
not just a
mm,
place where we um, produce goods or services, right? So I love working with women because I love drawing us to this like healthy middle
mm,
where we can say, yes, like you can work if that's what you choose to do, in terms of you can work outside of the home, you can pursue something that is ambitious and make a change in the world. But your identity no more comes solely from that than it does from the relationships that you have and what's happening in your home life, or whether or not you're married, or if you have kids. It doesn't come only from what church you're a part of,
mm.
that there is a you that stands outside of and above all of those different life buckets.
Yeah.
So that feels like a
It's good.
fun opportunity for me with women,
Yeah.
that I think isn't quite there with men. Maybe we can help them get the hint a little bit. So we'll bring them into the healthy middle with us.
Right, right. No, I
Yeah,
think that's wonderful. I think so then with the women that you've been working with, and let's say we talk about some of their past experiences impacting them and where they are, and some of the things that you talked about in terms of what might be barriers, right?
right.
And they really are struggling with a sense of redemption.
Hmm.
How can a woman begin then to redeem her story?
Yeah. It's tricky. I mean, I think first is just to recognize, okay, do I feel that sense of like, do I have this absence where I haven't redeemed my story, right? So recognizing that that might be a longing that is there in your life. And then I think taking some space to actually go back and to kind of cull through your life where you're able to tell your story, you're able to start to capture those messages that have been with you. I always say when it comes to like our big life purpose, where really looking at three different questions. And so those can be like a helpful lens or guide, I think, for women that are wanting to redeem their story. And part of that is to look at, who am I? So what is my unique identity? Like what am I about? How have
Yeah.
I been wired? To look at like what's my North Star? Like what's the direction of my life? So where am I headed? And a lot of that comes from looking at what are the messages that have already popped up in my life story. So if I can sit with someone in a safe way and process that with them, or if I can
Mm,
journal and do that alone, but to actually take notes on like telling, I remember in our therapy training, I remember having this one wonderful class where we actually had to sit and put together a lot like a testimony in church, but you'd actually
mm,
put together and write your whole life story and tell someone
yeah.
about it. And how amazing that was to be able to extract the messages of how you've been living. And then to also do a really fun thing where you start to ask the third question that we're kind of trying to understand with our purpose is, well, how do I get there? So how do I reach the goals that I have, or how do I step into my purpose? And in order to do that, we have to kind of audit where we are now, see what I have access to, where have I been uniquely placed, and what kind of influence do I have that I can steward. And if you look at all of those different pieces, that can help you start to redeem some of your past and start to move into a healthier place. Um, but I think it can be an overwhelming process, but you've got to break it down and kind of tackle
Yeah.
one of those things at a time.
Yeah, for sure. Because then I think the thing that holds a lot of people are the fears that
Yes.
just I often think about the lies we believe in, the narrative that we live
Yes.
into, and a lot of the fears are stemmed in lies that we might believe. And so I think there are some things here that you already spoke to, but I think what comes to mind specifically, if there was one thing, and I know there's many more, and I really want to encourage everyone who does see this, for women who happen to see the replay on this or enjoying this now, for the women that you know in your life, definitely check out Chanel's book, Life Starts Now, because she goes into so much. And we've really just scratched the surface of what she is bringing today. But what would be one thing that would help women to just kind of even just have a break, breaking through the lies or the fears?
Yeah, I think to recognize that there are some limits. So, one of my favorite parts of the book is at the opening. It talks a little bit about the three limiting beliefs that I really feel like a lot of women are trapped in those ideas. And one of them I talked about a little bit with that idea of work. Of my identity comes from the work that I do, and so getting to a place where you can start to recognize I'm not a human, doing, I'm a human being. And so what does it
Yeah,
look like for me to have meaning outside of whatever I can create? Another space, and it's which is tied to that, is to recognize that my life is like bigger and broader than I often give myself credit for. So I think we limit ourselves. We try to locate our purpose and the
yeah,
meaning in our life in one little strip of like our career bucket or something. And
yeah,
I think when you can realize, oh, there's all these different parts of me, there's my relationships and my spirituality and all of this, how I contribute globally or engage the world around me, all of those things make up who I am. So if you can start to develop a bigger, broader sense of yourself,
yeah,
I often find that more meaning naturally starts to come out because there's likely an area of your life where you're making a great contribution and where you're having an impact that you've discounted because for whatever reason you feel like it's not enough. And so if you can
yeah,
kind of start to live that enoughness
yeah,
language in your own mind, that would be helpful. um, but if you're what I see a lot, but especially in New York City with women, is we're taking longer and longer with getting married, and the
mhm,
dating world is so wild and
yes,
unhelpful.
mm,
And so I think this idea that I have permission to
mm,
live a meaningful life outside of any relationship that I'm in, that I can be whole, um, whether that means, outside of family relationships or friendships, even, that I can be a whole person just standing on my own 2 feet. That's
yes.
another really helpful place to start. So you can look in the book and kind of look at some of those limiting beliefs, and I would encourage you to sit with those for a minute and to ask, like, at what point in my life have I maybe been tempted to believe these, and
Yeah,
in what ways are those things keeping me stalled from like stepping into what I want?
yeah. No, it's so good. Oh, Chanel, our hour is almost up, and I don't know if there's questions or anything, but I just want to say if people wanted to get in touch with you, check you out, I know, what's the best way or how can they find you? Can you share your handles?
Yeah. So definitely come to my website. You can go to chaneldokun.com. We have some great resources, especially once you read the book. There's some prompts in there for some worksheets and activities and like really practical exercises that you can do. So those things live on my website for free. So if you can also go there and get those resources that'll help you implement what's actually in the book in certain spaces, that would be great.
And
Um,
by the way, she has a fantastic podcast also that you can find on through
yes.
her website. So please check it out.
Yes, yes, you can listen. It's Clarify Your Calling, which is a great space to get some of that. And then I love being a real person on social media. So if you're on Instagram, come follow me, Chanel.Dokun, and send me a DM. I love like connecting with real people and just kind of being an encouragement in your life. So hopefully some good reminders to keep you centered on your purpose on in the social space.
That's awesome. Now, earlier you mentioned a course that one can
Yeah.
take. Is that also through your website?
Yeah, yeah, you can go to the website, you can get the Reclaim the Morning course. It is a great first step coming out of the book. So, in order to implement, you need a space. You need a sacred space in your life where you can pause and actually prioritize your needs and prioritize this work of kind of stepping into your purpose. And so, the Reclaim the Morning process is a great way to do that. So, yeah, head to the website. Right now, I think we have a special deal that's kind of available where even if you're not a part of like our Women of Consequence community. If you're not a member of that, you can get member pricing for it, because I wanted to make sure everyone that read the book could step into something. So yeah, definitely head to chaneldokun.com/reclaim the morning, and it's all there.
That is awesome. So one last thing.
Yeah.
Um, what is your dream for the women who read Life Starts Now?
Yeah, I keep going back to, I hope that women will feel wildly affirmed in what they're currently feeling, of the discontent and the dissatisfaction, and that they would feel a sense of relief that they aren't the only one, that these are things that people share behind the scenes in therapy
Yeah.
and life planning rooms all the time. And then outside of that, I hope that they'll just have a very practical way forward. I really fought in this book to not just have it be a self help book that gives you like fluffy inspiration. I wanted it to be something where you could be inspired, but also take action because life starts now.
Yes.
So I hope that women not only feel affirmed and inspired, but are also able to make real change in their life.
Yeah. Well, I love, what you're doing. I love how you exemplify so much of living in the now and, just sharing a little bit of your story. And I so appreciate you coming on and sharing
Thanks.
with this community, whoever happens to come across ReEnvision Life Talks. And I really hope and yeah, that things will just spread like wildfire, that everybody will be able to find your book and read it and really be impacted by it. And so many blessings to you, Chanel. I
Thank you.
appreciate you and what you do. And so thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to everyone, I just want to say, again, ReEnvision Life Talks comes on once a month, the third Sunday of every month at 4 o'clock. I wish I could do it more often or at a different time. It's just what my schedule currently allows. So thank you for finding us, for viewing this, and I hope that we'll see you next time. So take care, everyone.